with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with good friend and co-host, Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, do you think that the election, the 2019 election for our president in 2020, and of course the new Congress as well, in all kinds of state elections and legislatures and governorships, do you think that's on the way yet? Do you think we've arrived?
Yes. Cut to the chase. Yes. I mean, I think it's very vibrant. It's very much alive. It's been alive. I think people were waiting a long, long time to get involved and come out and support this president. Apparently, we're down here in Florida. It's been raining very badly for the last few weeks, including for the 40 some odd hours prior to the rally the other night. And folks were camped out for almost 2 days, Neil, in the rain, in bad weather, and just not giving up.
Incredible. And you see that, just what's happening in our country. It's so amazing. You read about the polls and, all the Democrats are beating the president. But you see this enthusiasm that's there and this sort of rally. And what was it? The president collected, within 24 hours, like $25 million. It was like incredible. Yes. And this is all coming in.
Broke a record.
It's coming in all little bits of money. This isn't like, one big fat cat dude, wrote a check for $25 million. This is coming
this is not the Koch brothers. You can be sure of that. Not happening.
It's not happening.
Not happening. No, these are the average Americans. These are the deplorables. These are the people that the Democrats absolutely have misunderstood, insulted, and told folks in West Virginia, hey, if you elect me, let me think who said that. That's right, Hillary. If you elect me, I'll put you out of business.
Well,
wow. So these folks are very, very excited. They're very motivated, and I don't pay attention to the polls.
Well, and what we are seeing, though, is this epic confrontation between Democrat socialism, whatever that means, and economic freedom. Really, we're seeing that. It's on the scales. In which way are those scales going to tip? It's going to be fascinating to watch. This thing is going to be many ups and downs, twists and turns. There's so many things that's just not foreseeable that is going to happen from now until November 2019. It's going to just be an amazing ride. Amazing ride. Just stay plugged into it.
But you need a lot of popcorn. You're going to have to sit back, watch this popcorn, have your Coke, case of Coke there.
It's going to
do that.
It will be entertaining.
Yeah. Maybe some butter. I don't know about that.
But, one of the big topics, we're going to hear a lot about this, certainly in the election cycle. Everybody's going to be weighing in on America's trade position in the world. What should America be? What should we invest in, and what's our future? And how should we operate with foreign countries? How should we compete against them? How should we cooperate with them? What kind of jobs will this country have in the future? So much is at stake. And we just went through this very long process with our great friends in Canada and Mexico, and we ended up with a trade agreement that has not yet been ratified by Congress, but now Mexico has just passed it through their legislature. So, Mexico's on board with this. Mm-hmm. I think the president's meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau shortly. I'd be very surprised if Canada's
they were actually at the White House earlier today,
okay.
And then the Iranian thing came up, and they had a segue off.
Okay,
of that
well there you go. So
he's
they're
on
talking.
It.
They're talking. It looks like that they've kissed and made up, and now they set it all aside, and let's get on to doing business, which we should have been doing all along. But what happens with our Congress? And of course,
and therein is the rub.
There's the rub, and because our Congress, at least the House side of the Congress, doesn't want to give this president a win, no matter what, no matter what, no matter if it's good for the American workers and businesses and consumers. They don't want to give this president a win. Or will they set politics aside and do what's right for the country? Well, bringing on our first guest right now, Gerry Scimeca. He is the Vice President of the Consumer Action for a Strong Economy, and his group is a free market consumer advocacy organization. I love it. Gerald, welcome to Made in America.
Hey, thank you, Neil, for having me. Great to be on.
So, big deal, USMCA. And I read your piece. I believe it was in the Washington Examiner, a great piece. And you're saying that the USMCA is good for the United States, good for the American worker, good for the American consumer, who you advocate on behalf of. And in the opinion piece, it was titled, "The USMCA hinges on removing tariffs and quotas, which you think are a drag to the American consumer." So tell us about the USMCA. How important is this to our country? How important is it to our consumers? And where do we go from here?
Sure. Well, we like the direction it's going in. The devil is always in the details. And you always have to remember, being cautiously optimistic, on all sides, this is passed by politicians in Canada and Mexico, and they have constituencies and special interests they've got to face and they've got to go get elected from, as well as President Trump does, too. So there's always horse trading, and there's always gaming in the margins, as it were. But in a general sense, it is a big step in the right direction. It does eliminate tariffs on a wide range of areas and a wide range of products. That'll be good for consumers and good for our economy overall. You always find out later when you have a major piece of legislation, whether it's Obamacare or it could be a Defense Act, that somewhere down the line, buried in some pages that no one has gotten to yet, there might be some awful, idea. But so far, as a general direction, we do think it's a step in the right direction, because it will eliminate the tariffs, that will increase free trade, and that's ultimately good for the entire economy.
So it really would be. Obviously, Mexico ratified it this week. They're very much in favor of it. It would appear that Canada would probably do the same thing. So let's center back down into the Nancy Pelosi's of the world and the Democrats in Congress and in the Senate. So they really would do the right thing if they would vote for this. It really inures great benefit to the average person on Main Street.
Well, there you go. The Mexican government may be more pro-Trump than Nancy Pelosi, so that's something that may come out of this. But I think you nailed it earlier when you were talking about the politics of this, is do they want to hand the president a victory? 80% of Mexico's imports go to the United States, so almost any trade agreement that they have with us is going to be, very popular and very important for them, and their entire economy hinges on it, and they're very dependent upon trade with the United States, more so than any other country. And I think that's what the Democrats are going to decide right now, is do they want to give the president a win on this? Do they want to be difficult on issues like environmental regulations and labor regulations? The union's going to be happy with it. They'll just kind of use their leverage as much as possible to see what they can do with it.
Well, I have a question. And we know that a great part of the trade between Mexico and the United States is agriculture. It's very, very important. And I mean, I would think the message that the Dems would send out, Neal and Gerard, by the way, it's a great name, Gerard Butler, I like that actor. But for the Dems to turn this down or drag it out and not allow these three countries to unify the way they should, and hurt the heartland and those in the Southwest who are creating the products, including California, the breadbasket, of the United States, and to turn that down and hurt these folks in terms of getting their product, working with their product, going back and forth over the border. God, that would be such an awful message prior to the election, don't you think?
Yeah, it would cost us avocados, too, which are, I know, very important to me personally, but we need those Mexican avocados. They will rant and rail and probably distort some of the details of the agreement. I might expect them to say that labor is not being treated fairly, that they will get on a soapbox and look for more concessions on wages as they did with the manufacturing portion of this. I mean, as the deal itself said, not the Democrats actually got that part through, but there's a certain amount of labor agreements of how the labor is going to be made up, what the what they're going to be paid, benefits, and all those things that are being normalized as part of this. So I could very much see the Democrats, demanding more concessions for labor. I don't really think that they have the interest of people in their best interest of people in their heart. None of their policies are mostly really just about using leverage to deliver for their core constituencies.
And, the thing with labor is that if this was a Democrat president, and the Democrat president never had the guts to do this, but if it was a Democrat president, there would be billions and billions and billions of dollars for retraining and re-education to the unions, which was nothing more than just giving them money. Payoff.
Yeah.
Right? But see, there isn't that in this agreement, so the unions won't support it. Hey, Gerald, would you be able to stick around for a second? Because I want to talk about China and about trade and about, the advocacy to the consumer with our trade agreement with China and how you see that. It's very, very important for our listeners.
Absolutely.
Coming up, you don't want to miss it. We're going to talk about China, tariffs, the consumer, and your jobs. Stick with us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. And we're joined with Gerry Scimeca, who's the Vice President for the Consumer Action for a Strong Economy, which is a free market consumer advocacy organization. And we're all about economic freedom and free markets and creating jobs and bringing our jobs home, and manufacturing and trade is just so important to making the economy work for all of us, no matter where we fit, whatever kind of jobs we have. Trade is very important. It impacts everywhere, our cities, our rural communities. It impacts everything that we do and many things that we buy. Just about everything we buy somehow is impacted by a global supply chain, whether or not it's made in our country or it's assembled somewhere else. It's so fundamentally important to the quality of our life. So, Gerard, when it comes to trade, and, I just kind of summed it up, at least in my mind, about how important it is. It's our only trade partners is not just Canada and Mexico, which are hugely, hugely important to us, but, there's others around the world. And right now we have obviously a big issue with China. And in the news this week, it looks like a big issue with India is starting to brew, right? I mean, they're starting now to put punitive tariffs on American products because of some of the actions that the Trump administration has taken against India. But let's stick with China for a second. What does the tariffs mean right now for the American consumer and who you advocate for? What does tariffs to China mean? And I got to tell you, I'm an American manufacturer, and whatever increases we're seeing, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of increases on our raw material supplies. 50% of what we buy from China are components that goes into our products. I mean, and I'm saying that as overall, and it's certainly that way with our company. Everything is going up. So our retailers and customers are paying more for the product, and they're passing on the cost to the consumer. It would be totally a fantasy world if you did not know that these tariffs were going to be paid by the consumer. At least that's what I see. What do you see?
Well, tariffs are always paid by the consumer. They either get reduced supplies, or in which case prices go up, or you get the fees tacked on are always just funneled. It's a pass-through right to consumers. I think recently that Apple was asking for an exemption so they did not have to pay the tariff on the components for their phones and their other devices. China is a very interesting case because, unlike other countries, say where Trump had a dispute with Merkel about buying energy from Russia and India, which heavily subsidizes things like sugar and other agricultural products. They're very predatory. The government injects a lot of subsidies to prop up domestic industries. The China trade deal always has these other issues involving especially intellectual property rights and theft and the hacking and the sort of the espionage that's going on. China is the number one world pirate. It's not even close. The amount of data and the source code they steal, and they take our movies and music and they pirate those things. That's been a long problem, and Trump, to an extent, has been combining trade into those discussions and negotiations. That aside from getting China to try to buy more energy and soybeans, he is encouraging them to move along on their state-sponsored theft, I guess. The government is just very supportive of domestic attempts to steal American intellectual property and security and source code and all that stuff. So those two things are kind of going to go together. I do not see a trade deal until those other issues are fully resolved, although they do seem to be making progress, which is very, very positive.
Well, let me ask you this as it relates to the trade deal. I mean, everyone's saying, oh, my God, we got a trade deal. It's really going to be great, and the market's going to jump, and it's going to be wonderful, and all those wonderful, wonderful, terrific things are going to occur. But I don't see a trade deal coming in the short term. What we might see, and when I'm listening to some of the talking heads coming out of Washington, is that we might see bits and parcels of agreements coming along, things that we can do short term as opposed to a larger long-term deal. Do you think that makes more sense, or do you think nothing until later in the year or maybe next year, or do you think they're just going to drag it out until 2020?
You put your finger on it. You just never know. They have negotiations. Things look like they're going positively, and then all of a sudden somebody walks away. There's so many issues with China right now. It seems like the smartest play would be to get concessions and make agreements where you can. Part of the thing that I'd written about in the Examiner piece was the steel and aluminum tariffs, and a lot of that was generated by China because they are dumping a lot of cheap steel and aluminum on the market. It's going to be very difficult to predict, but possibly with an election year and possibly with things moving in the right direction and Trump having better leverage now, that we're very hopeful. Anytime there's good news coming out of negotiation with China, the markets respond very favorably. And so let us hope that big progress is made there because they are still the number one sticking point in our trade disputes.
Hey, Gerald, thanks for coming on the show. It's very fascinating to talk about trade, getting your perception, especially on behalf of the American consumer, because that's ultimately who makes the decisions in this country. We really appreciate it. Gerry Scimeca, Vice President of Consumer Action for a Strong Economy.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Coming up, we have Dan Eberhart. He's the CEO of the oil field services provider, Canary LLC. And from trade, we're going to go to energy. Trade and energy, two very, very important topics in our country. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neal Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So Rich, I got to tell you, trade, think about it. All around the world, what's going on. Of course, you have what's happening here with Mexico and Canada. Huge, huge, huge. We got to ratify this thing. We got to get it. We got to get it in the books, in the law, and then keep it there for the next many months. So the entrepreneurs of our country know what they're dealing with, and they can plan accordingly. And now we got to go and we got a lot of other issues to deal with. What happens with China? What happens with India? That one is starting to boil over. Not nearly as big of a market as China, but I just read the other day that the population of India, and I believe it's 2027, will eclipse China. How we always say, China is the most populous country in the world. Well, within another decade, that's not going to be true. It's going to be India. And now, we're having this sort of mini trade war going on with India. What happens with Europe, right? Well, we're talking about 25% tariffs on automobiles. All those Mercedes. You drive a Mercedes. You better keep that Mercedes because the next one's going to be a lot more expensive potentially.
I look forward to that. I truly do. Fortunately, I have another 3 years on this. So we just got it. So we're
locked
good on
in.
that. Now I'm locked in for 36 months. Hey, listen, and don't forget, Brexit's, out there percolating right now. That's another explosive area.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the whole thing with the European Union, do we have a trade agreement with them or not? Or do we go to the UK? Does the UK, if they do a hard exit from Brexit, then what does that mean? Well, it means that they don't have a deal with the European Union.
Well, Boris doesn't care. He just said, listen, we're out. We're going to be out in October, whether we have a deal or not deal. It's going to be a hard walkout. And he's going to just let the cards fall where they may. So he says, as the elections come forward.
And it looks like he's going to pull this thing off. I mean, it does. It would be very fascinating to see Boris and President Trump standing next to each other. This is going to be talk about a wild ride. I mean, buckle up for that one. Hey, but, trade, very important. Also very important, energy. I mean, to our economy, how many times have we talked about energy? I mean, remember the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline, and how many shows that we had on that, and just generally our energy policy.
Well, shutting down areas that we can extract oil, the inability of having ongoing oil on a regular basis for a good price, giving up our sovereignty to the Mideast and other countries that really don't like us that much, and at the vagaries of those who want to do what they want to do.
And it's so fascinating. It's like one of these underreported, very huge accomplishments, being energy self-sufficient. I mean, the United States is an exporter of energy.
We're a net exporter of energy, and that is a brilliant move.
Brilliant move. But there's some in this country who would differ, thinking that we should just shut it all down, turn off the spigot.
That's why some are brilliant, others are trainable, and that's the way it goes.
The Green New Deal, if you've heard about that.
There's your trainable person right there.
Hey, let's carry on this fascinating discussion with Dan Eberhart, who's the CEO of Canary LLC, which is an oil field service provider. He comments on energy. You can see him all over the media, and he is with us today, Rich. Dan, welcome back to Made in America.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
So very fascinating. I mean, in your latest piece, you wrote about President Trump's energy policy, comparing it to President Obama's energy policy, which was, I believe it was an executive order. It got all shot down by the courts. Now, does that sound familiar? Shutting down by the courts? I guess it happens to both sides.
The American way. It's the American way. That's the way it's done now.
Yeah, that's forget Congress. The courts. But hey, Dan, tell us what's going on with President Trump's plan and why do you think that is better?
Sure. So, well, Trump came out with, and I was with EPA Administrator Wheeler yesterday, and he came out with the Trump's affordable energy plan, and basically the point is a little bit different from Obama had the Clean Power Plan, but which also got stopped by the courts eventually. But what that plan was supposed to do was shut down coal-fired power plants in their tracks. But in reality, what happened was the research, energy costs went up, and the research on how to make clean coal basically was stopped dead in its tracks. Trump's plan is really based on a gradual wind down in coal-fired power plants in a way that makes sense but doesn't raise energy costs for consumers. And Trump's plan is really focused on how do we manage having clean air and affordable energy and not have a spike in energy costs in the medium term. And I think it's better for consumers while still factoring in the air quality and the environmental concerns as well. So I think it makes a lot more sense. In speaking with Administrator Wheeler yesterday, the goal of the administration is really to tilt the focus from the Obama administration more to let's focus on clean air first and take a look at climate change second. And that's really a focus of the Trump administration from an environmental perspective. The other focus is let's look at the ROI or the return on investment on what we're getting for the environmental regulations, and let's make sure that it's worth it, and not just extremely expensive for minute 0.01% changes in environmental standards or climate change. Let's make sure that the benefits outweigh the costs.
Well, yeah, I mean, and when you think about it, they say, well, Obama's plan was going to, really hurt the the power plants and so forth, and Trump's plan can bring, more deaths quicker. in the United States. I just love those rash generalizations.
Well,
it's so exciting.
Well, hold that thought for a second, because we're going to have to go for a quick break. We're going to be right back with Dan Eberhart, who's the CEO of Canary LLC. Still a lot to talk about on energy, a very, very big impact on your jobs. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. And we're back with Dan Eberhart, CEO of Canary LLC, an oil field service provider working all around the world in the energy industry. You see him in the media, one of our great thought leaders on America's energy policies. So, Dan, back to the discussion about what should we do in the EPA and the energy standards and all of that. I got to tell you, my company, I'm a manufacturer. We manufacture a lot of commercial refrigeration, ice machines, commercial warewashing, dishwashing machines. And, under the Trump administration, it was really, really tough because the Department of Energy were coming out with standards that were just absolutely impossible to meet. And then, you go to these sort of things in Washington that they host, and they want to hear from the community, and you tell them everything, why it's going to impact all these jobs, and there's no technology that's allowing us to get to these standards. And it was just like, okay, tough luck. There's going to be collateral damage. We're going to lose these jobs. It's just absolutely inevitable. The whole thing of climate change is more important than the jobs that we're going to lose.
So that would be the Obama administration.
That was the Obama administration.
Yeah, that's the Obama administration.
Right, that's the Obama administration. Yeah. Now we get to the Trump administration, and okay, he's kind of changed gears and has gone into this new direction, like you just mentioned. It's about clean air, not necessarily climate change. But I got to tell you, as an American manufacturer, there are still very, very stringent rules and regulations on making our products not only safe, but making them environmentally friendly. So I want to dispel this whole notion that the President Trump has come in with his administration and he's just opened up that we can do anything and everything and it doesn't matter. The environment's not important. That is totally wrong. And in fact, you even have the auto industry now complaining about the Trump mileage standards. So President Trump, I think, has been very responsible in making sure that we still very much respect our environment and do things that are very responsible and not like what you hear on the left here that, President Trump doesn't care about the environment, like businesses can do anything they want, they can pollute, they can get away with all this stuff. That's just not true.
No, the truth is, look, I've got a daughter. Everyone wants a clean river. Everyone wants clean air. Everyone wants to be good environmental stewards. It's not a zero sum one or the other game. It's important. What I think the difference is a matter of tone and a matter of degree. Trump got all this flack for pulling out of the pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. Well, you know what? We are actually, if you take those goals and milestones, the U.S. is actually ahead of the standard that was set in the Paris Climate Accords. And all of the European nations are behind, all of them. So, we're still leading.
Point? Yeah.
We're still
so where's
leading.
the media? Where's the media at in all this?
Well, they conveniently just push it under the rug, man, and they leave all this kind of stuff out. We have very tough environmental standards, whether or not we're a part of an international agreement or not. We have very, very tough environmental standards in the U.S. And what we're doing is we're leading on this issue worldwide, whether we're part of the Paris Climate Accords or not. But what I think is different about Trump versus the Obama administration is the Obama administration was tone deaf or didn't care about what industry needed, and they were pitiful at analyzing the return on the regulations for environmental standards and completely absent at looking at the economic impact. And this is where I think the Trump administration has a more balanced approach that looks at conservation, looks at air quality, looks at climate change, but also looks at the return on investment and the technology that's out there. You guys can Google a company called Navistar with International Harvester. They wasted $2 billion to try to come up with a compliant engine for tractors and then gave up. It nearly bankrupted an American icon, the International Harvester brand. They could not come up with a compliant engine. You know who else quit trying to come up with a compliant engine? Caterpillar. Both of those companies said, you know what? We can't come up with an engine for Class 8 tractor trailers that meets this environmental spec. And that to me is a symptom of the problem, or that to me is the problem. Why is D.C. allowed to come up with regulations and specs that industry and technology can't quite get there, and they're destroying capital and destroying jobs? The industry's got to have a seat at the table, and you've got to balance conservation and air quality and regulations with what industry can do and the jobs and the economic impact. And it needs to be a holistic approach. You can't just pile regulations on top of regulations and go home and feel good about yourself because you did something about the environment. You've got to look at
Dan,
the
here's the problem.
ramifications.
Here's the problem with that, Dan, is that they do have these, these meetings in Washington where they bring in industry, and they do ask all these questions, and they do get the perspective from the people who are creating the jobs and whatever technologies out there, and they listen to them. But it doesn't matter because the ideology is what matters. And it's like, who cares if there's collateral damage? Go lose those jobs. I don't care about those jobs. You're going to go figure it out. Somehow you'll figure it out. Yeah, it might be 5 years. It might be 10 years. You go figure it out. And then, hey, it doesn't exist. Well, that's tough luck. You go figure it out. I mean, that is what they come back with. They just don't listen. They don't listen.
Well, but there's more to it. I think Dan pointed something out very interesting in the comparatives between Trump and Obama. There's another aspect, there's another element that was involved in the Paris Accord that we pulled out of, and that is wealth distribution. Redistribution, yes.
Right.
The Paris Accord was taking U.S. money and redistributing it out of guilt or whatever else we were going to do to prepare the third and fourth world nations to move into the 21st, 22nd century under this new umbrella of new energy. And I think that attitude has a tremendous effect in Washington and whether they care about the industries or not, because there is a subliminal message and a reason that's parallel to everything that was driving the Obama administration.
Ideology.
Yeah,
ideology.
Dan, we got about 30 seconds left. You get the last word.
Sure. So, look, the difference, I think, here and what's going on, the U.S. with the Paris Climate Accords, environmental groups can sue for us not meeting aspirational goals. Most of the European and other industrialized countries, they're not held to that standard. They can have lofty goals without enforcement. Also, I think the Trump administration is really focused on clean air over climate change, and I think that should be the priority.
Fantastic. And we know Europeans, they make really big promises like NATO, and they don't follow through on their financial commitments there. So not surprising they don't follow through on their climate change commitments either. Hey, Dan, thanks for coming on the show. Very, very great discussion. We really appreciate it.
Hey, I'm a fan of the show. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day. You don't want to miss it. It's been a great show. We're going to sum it up, and we're going to have some more discussions about your jobs.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Energy, Rich, so fundamentally important, to our economy and in fact to the world. America is so blessed. We have this abundance of energy, right? I mean, in all kinds of energy. And let me tell you, solar energy and wind energy and all of that, we have a lot of that too. But the technology and the time is not quite there yet, right? So there's going to be this bridge, and that bridge is really, I would say maximize or exploiting or taking advantage of. That's a better word, or this abundance that we have in putting it to work for the American people and creating jobs and making our economy very efficient. And see, that's going to buy us time to create new technologies. And by the way, when we talk about fossil fuels, this isn't the 1950s. This isn't these really belching power plants.
Those days
with all
are
that
gone.
Big
no,
black
they're
smoke
gone,
going.
Neal.
They're gone. The technology, clean coal technology, and what we've been able to do with fossil fuels. Take a look at the the standards and the mileage standards of our vehicles today, right? I mean, it's still fossil fuels, but they're going 3 times, 4 times, 5 times as much per gallon of gasoline. And the gasoline is much cleaner than it used to be, right? It's not the leaded stuff.
No, we're much smarter than we were a long, long time ago. And I have to tell you, the battle that we fought in the 70s, when we're listening to about, acid rain in the Northwest area, in upstate New York, we had acid rain. It was killing the trees. Those days are not here anymore. We took that seriously. The crying Indian, and you remember the Native American crying in the commercial that came out for the EPA back in the 70s, saying, oh, my God, we're killing our streams. We don't do that. We've cleaned it. We've worked it. What I find astounding is that we have all this energy, which is such a smart tool, not just for American manufacturing in our homes and to power our everything that we want in this United States, but it is a leverage to manipulate and work with the rest of the world. And when you say, well, wait a minute, is Trump really hard on Russia? Yeah, by having a strong energy policy, he's very strong on our enemies. Why is that? Because the one area that Russia's making all this money on for themselves has been energy, isn't it? They supply energy, natural gas, to Western Europe, Eastern Europe. And we have that ability to replace that. So it's a very, very important scenario for us to be involved in and thinking about. Energy is very crucial. We're not destroying the trees. We're not worrying about the water anymore. We're not what we were, 35, 40, 50 years ago. You're right. It ain't the 1950s, kid.
So, very well said. What's a couple? We just got a little bit of time left. What's a couple of headlines that really struck you this week?
Well, I'm very intrigued with the markets going right now. Now we're getting pretty close to 27,000. We've hit a couple of records. The S&P had a very strong record this week.
And if
we're very excited.
If the Fed reduces interest rates,
that's a headline for this week. It's been telegraphing that we think we're going to lay low on rates, and now they're saying, well, we think we have a rate cut coming, which is very interesting.
Yeah, and again, for the economy, whether or not you see that, immediately within your interest rates. I mean, it is signaling that the market in the economy is in good shape and that we can afford to take a rate cut. And just psychologically, business and creating jobs and what's going on in the economy and people having the confidence to invest in their dreams, a lot of that is perception. If the perception is
it's all perception. It's emotional.
All coming together. This is the right time. Because of all these indicators and these pieces of information. We're connecting the dots, and the dots are telling us and leading us to it's time to invest. It's time to put our markers down. Let's make that bet on ourselves, on our small businesses, on the inventions and our dreams and all of the things that we've been working on. Now is the time.
It's sort of like the movie Jon Favreau, and he's talking about, it's a movie Chef, and he looks at the other guy and says, you're not getting to me. You're not getting to me. Well, you know what? They're not getting to us because we control our own destiny. That's an amazing statement to make 8 years after, 8 years of Obama. Now we're into Trump, and we're stable with energy. That's an amazing statement to make.
And the jobs that derive out of that.
And the confidence that manufacturers such as yourself can have a constant, good source of energy that's efficient and the right price.
Well, let economic freedom rain down on us.
Amen, brother.
The benefits are absolutely astounding. We have to always remember that. Economic freedom. It is in our hearts. It's our passion. It is our prosperity. It's our strength. It is who we are as a nation. Rich, unfortunately, we're out of time. We got those juices going, though, today. Man.
It was good. No, this is great. This is passionate stuff.
But we're going to be back again next week, Rich, for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.